Hi, I'm David Allen Lambert, and I'm pleased to be here with my colleague Terry O'Connell today for another episode of Virtual Historians. And I want to just ask Terry, what's new with you?
Not a whole heck of a lot here, but we're enjoying the beautiful weather. The cold seems to be gone, so that's good.
We're enjoying it here too, but I get the air conditioning on, so I got a sweatshirt on. But that's a New England thing, wait 5 minutes and the weather changes.
Same
Well,
here.
well, I'm really excited to bring one of our new friends, Michelle Taylor, to Virtual Historians today, and we're going to learn about what she does. Now, many of you may be genealogists, but are you also an archaeologist? Okay, so you get that on your checklist. So virtual historians have a archaeologist, genealogist, anthropologist, and someone who can make amazing things come alive with 3D printing, which is our VR part of the thing, virtual reality, with making history a reality in a different way. So without further ado, I want to introduce Michelle. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hi, David. Hi, Terry. I'm so excited to be here today. How are you?
We're doing great. It's funny, we met through Clubhouse, which is an app a lot of people may not know about, and we just kind of bumped into each other, I think, when we first used it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like when Clubhouse first came out, they had so many genealogy rooms to choose from. And I think the first room I saw you in was like a military history room. And I said, oh, that's right up my alley. So I joined and, kicked it off just like that.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens. And of course, with COVID going on, so many of us have been meeting people virtually because that whole in-person handshaking, nice to meet you that we've had for millennia, it's kind of been robbed from us for a little while. So it's nice to meet with you virtually one level up, because I don't think we've all chatted on camera before. So this is great to have you here. One of the things I was doing, because as a genealogist and historian, I kind of sleuth out people, and I was blown away by an NPR story about you from a few years ago, where you actually volunteered to help recreate enslaved cabins at Montpelier, where James Madison lived. I need to know about this. Tell us about that story.
Absolutely. So when I started school as an undergraduate student, I was studying anthropology, and it led me to, also doing my genealogy research. And within like a year or two into the program, I found out about a connection to my family through my mother's side. And basically I went ahead and did I went and did an excavation program at Montpelier. And the first excavation I did was on the same part of the state that I built this log cabin. So it was kind of like full circle for me. Like in 2012, I'm excavating as a student, and several years later, I'm going back reconstructing a log cabin. So it was really interesting because we worked with a salvage company, and they taught us like all the pointers and tips that you need to know to build a log cabin. I was like, oh, this is intimidating, especially in the middle. It was February, it was very cold, but it was such a rewarding process, especially because we did all the tools and techniques we learned were like, we didn't use, modern day equipment. We used all the traditional techniques that would have been used by the enslaved communities during that time. So it's a very rewarding whole experience. So I really thought I had to go back out there and try one of those workshops, because Montpelier offers so many public archaeology programs. And so I think that just was like one of my favorite experiences, being able to start from an archaeologist excavating, then moving on to like a builder in one way.
I mean, talk about 3D printing on a larger scale, that's amazing.
Exactly. Exactly. I know when I hear people say, oh, we can 3D print with steel and wood and chocolate. I'm like, oh, what? So, but this is a whole other thing. This is like hands in the dirt. You're right on the ground getting, dirty. I love outdoors. I love doing, activities like building, and I've always loved that. So I think, it was a perfect fit for me.
So talking about the cabins for a little bit. So how big was an enslaved cabin on Montpelier, with like dimension-wise ballpark?
So interesting enough, when we were building the cabins, it was based on the archaeology that was found there. So they found features in the ground that showed where it was. Like it would be the size of like a living room, an apartment size living room, to put it into perspective. I won't give dimensions because I'm not good with that, but I definitely say about the size of like apartment size living room. So one room for a whole family of 8, 9, 10 people.
Dirt floors and probably a hearth at one end of it, or not a hearth.
Yes. Yeah, it was so great when I was in 2012 taking my archaeology classes and being able to see like middens and seeing where the archaeology supported where the people lived, and seeing like, oh, this is the area where traditionally they would sweep in the morning, and you would find like a cluster of artifacts and all this material culture in one area, and it would just support, okay, this is where everything was being swept to, and this is where the actual posts are for the house. So to be able to go back and rebuild that to the likeness of what enslaved people there lived in, I think it just gives people, and to see it from the visitor center, when you drive into the facility, you can see the log cabin. So just to change how that looks, that I think just puts it into place for people to understand a little bit better.
And that's really the truth. I mean, places like Montpelier, and even with Monticello, I think for a number of years, they kind of swept clean there was an element, there was an enslaved population there, but as far as telling that story, even with colonial Williamsburg until recent years, that was kind of implied, but never displayed or recreated. So how many cabins did they make at Montpelier? Do you know?
Well, when I went and did the log cabin in 2016, I was the second log cabin that was built, and they have built, they only build it when they do the log cabin workshop. So each year they do the log cabin workshop, another one is built. Yeah. So I know they're up to at least 3 now, because I know they did one the year after I was in the workshop program.
That's awesome. Well, you did mention you have a family connection with Montpelier, and obviously as a genealogist, I'm curious about that. So can you tell us about with your connection?
Oh, definitely. So pretty much I knew my mom's family I was born and raised in Detroit. So I knew that side of the family migrated from Kentucky. But when I started sitting down talking with my mom's first cousin, I said, tell me what you know about your mother's side of the family. Although this would be like my in-laws side, he's told me some names, and I said, let me just plug it in and see how far I can go back. And when I got back to like the 1880s, 1870 census, I saw this name, George Gilmore. And I said, oh, look, he's living in Orange County, Virginia. That's only an hour away from where I live. And sometimes I think people they don't take advantage of Google. Like sometimes you can Google your answer. You never know what'll come up. So I think early on, I didn't realize it could be something out there about, your ancestors. So I did a quick Google search, but to my surprise, all of this information came up about George Gilmore and how he had a cabin that was still standing at Montpelier. So his home he raised his family in looks a lot different than those cabins that we reconstructed on the site, because it's like when you're driving down Constitution Highway, which is the highway that takes you to Montpelier, his cabin is located on the other side of the entrance. It's just really interesting to see that connection and go back and tell my cousin, wait, he at that time was living in South Carolina, and I think it was just amazing to know history was right there. And since I've lived in Virginia, I have found a lot of history right under my nose. So it's just fascinating.
And that's true. And I'm sure Terri will agree is that, I think most people who haven't dabbled in genealogy, some people don't even know their great grandmother's name, let alone her maiden name, or better yet, that your family could have lived 2 blocks from where you live now, or 200 miles from where you live now, because it's forgotten. If the next generation doesn't share that story, it's kind of lost until a genealogist like yourself comes along and to uncover it. So that's really cool.
I think it's important to add with Googling, if you've got somebody who's been doing their family history for, a decade or so, many of them are out there blogging, putting a lot of information out there. So I wrote a blog post years and years and years ago about the different great grandparents and their names. Maybe 3 years after one post, I got an email from a lady who said, we have to be related. That's a Hungarian name. I'm still in Hungary, and I Google my name every year, and I never find anything. This is the first time any hit has come from it. I have no clue how we connect. Obviously, it's through my Hungarian line, but it's important to put those names out there for anybody who is doing that kind of research.
I wholeheartedly agree, because I think that if more crowdsourcing, more putting it in blog and any kind of social media outlet where people can see it, is just going to draw in audiences. Like, I'm a member of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, which is located throughout this country, but I'm based in Richmond. And every meeting, we usually go over surnames at the beginning of the meeting. And that's just to establish, like, you never know who you're meeting with, and who's your cousin.
Right.
Now with the DNA, you really don't know. Like, I've been in spaces where I've met people and later on logged into Ancestry and they were my cousin. So it's kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, I'm really glad that my Christmas card list hasn't expanded versus the amount of autosomal DNA matches that I've had.
Yeah, you would have to like take out a loan just to send out Christmas cards, because
I guess I'll take them electronically. Well, I'm looking over your left shoulder and I see a 3D printer. So is that where you make all the magic happen, or similar, or you worked on it in school and you decided you had one at home? Or
yeah. So I started as an intern after graduating from college in the archaeology lab, the virtual creation lab. And all we did was like 3D scan, 3D print, and, catalog any of the artifacts that we were finding while doing our excavations, or any artifacts that different collections wanted 3D scanned. So after finishing that internship, I continued, training students in my next job in the library, training students how to use 3D printers and scanners. And I just needed one for myself. So I really love the one I have, because it's for educational purposes. It's straightforward. It's not like the ones that I worked with while, as an intern, they're like 4 figures. Like, this is like really, this is very cost efficient type of 3D printer, like on Amazon, like under $300. So I think,
that's amazing.
yeah, I think that's part of what I want people to take away with, doing their family history. You never know what kind of ways you can bring it to life to younger people. Like, when I do like presentations with like high school and middle school age students, they're so excited to see, like, hold actual artifacts and, learn that history that they've read in the textbook, see something visually to like translate to them in a way that is not always able to be done through text.
What do you print and bring in?
So actually, whenever I go to schools, I take a collection that's from the Virtual Creation Laboratory where I was an intern, and they'll have different boxes. So if I'm talking about African-American history, I'll take a box where people can see artifacts from as early as, the mid 1700s up until contemporary artifacts. So you would have anywhere, like for Montpelier particularly, you would have artifacts that were from the Gilmore cabin, because they've done excavations under the cabin where you would see toys that the children played with. They had a blacksmith. You could find artifacts that were connected to made by the blacksmith on the plantation. So just like anything to help convey that story of, what were the occupations of people who were enslaved, all the way to present day artifacts that show what their life's like afterwards.
Well, that's great. Well, I think the thing I find so exciting about archaeology is that so many things are behind glass walls in museums. With a 3D printer, you can pass around that Paleo Indian artifact or that clay pipe and not worry about the kid dropping it and breaking it, or,
Exactly.
when it's going around 80 kids in a hall and like, all right, who has the arrowhead? Hello? So
Exactly. And then you can print mass amounts of it, depending on, like, a lot of the artifacts we print are very small in scale, just so you're allowed to print more of it, because that makes it easier as well. And just creating activities into every subject. I've been invited to English classes, history, art classes. It varies, and you can bring a history into any of those fields. So this whole concept of STEAM, like we went from STEM and adding the A into it for art. So I think whenever you can bring that to life for students, it just makes it so much more exciting. And it keeps them engaged long term.
Well, I feel like a student, I'm sure Terry does right now, and I think we had talked before. You have a little bit of a presentation that you do talking about what you've worked on, and I'd love to have you share your screen and share with our audience if you don't mind.
Course. I want to talk a little bit about some of the latest trends that people can get into that may help them with their research. So to get started with today's presentation, I'm gonna go through some of the technologies that you can incorporate into your genealogy and archaeology research, starting with two of the newest Apple products on the market. We're not endorsed by Apple, but I definitely would love to talk about some of the things that you can use to help with your research. So if you are an Apple user or Apple fanatic, these are the latest products on the market that have LiDAR scanners. And prior to this, the previous iPads and iPhones did not have this sort of technology, which is very commonly used with archaeologists. And the way it's used, we see it used in AR, VR, and just different ways to 3D scan, whether you're scanning rooms or scanning objects. Just another way to enhance your ability to scan something, because you may have something in your family heirloom. Or I know in a previous conversation I had with David, we talked a lot about cemeteries. I think that's something I'm just very passionate about, is making sure that you're able to preserve. Sometimes we never know, like natural occurrences, can happen, and your tombstones can be destroyed or vandalism. So I think this is another way. If you already have, you may not know what kind of things your phone or iPad have already built in. So that's definitely two things I would tell people: look at what your specs are on your device and see if you can incorporate that into it. Because prior to that, like when I was starting off learning how to 3D scan, we used a lot of devices sort of like this one on the screen, the structure sensor, where you're actually connecting your iPad or iPhone to a scanner, attachment scanner, and uploading it to one of the various online websites to 3D print. Another thing that, going back to some of these Apple updates, is enhancing your research by using the scribble tool. I think any Apple user, sometimes we are not aware, there are always so many updates. And so with the scribble tool, you can, if you have an iPad and the Apple Pencil paired, you can write anything, whether it's in cursive or in straight hand, and it'll convert it into text. So that could be great when you're interviewing your family members, or any kind of way that can speed up your ability to do any research. So I love using that feature. I actually can share my iPad screen in this Zoom call and give some examples, because I use it a lot with creating family trees. Going back to like that whole cemetery perspective to 3D scanning and printing, I actually went to one of the free websites, sketchfab.com, and just did a quick search, because when it comes to military history, particularly a focus of mine is the United States Color Troops, and looking for their tombstones, you'll see that this particular one is not a USDT, but it has been scanned and it's free to download and alter. So that's something I love about using some of these free websites, is they will allow you to edit the object to your heart's content as long as you credit them. So it depends on what kind of copyright permissions they give you. But in this case, like you have, what kind of format this tombstone was in, and you can say, okay, this is the same format I've seen for my ancestor. You can modify it and make any, change the name. But if you have that ability to use the 3D scanning technology that I talked about, that just will allow you to scan it yourself and upload it to one of these websites and do similar things with it. And they're like, you just search on the website, whatever you're looking for. It can be very specific or very broad, but some people do charge, because they have not just 3D objects, they have VR and AR objects that can be downloaded and added into your games. They have the files where you can 3D print it. It just varies. So I think it's like a lot of these websites are just really beneficial to being able to do 3D scanning and printing and virtual reality and all the above. So going back into what we talked about at the beginning is like work I did at Montpelier and how I've evolved since starting as an intern and moving up. But here, when I was an intern, a lot of the collection that we worked with 3D scanning was located right in-house. A lot of like a lot of historical sites, they have like off-site locations for their artifacts, but for Montpelier, they're all on site and you're able to have visitors see it in person. And I think, that's just one aspect of how you can look at artifacts but as we know now, everything's opening back up. But at the same time, how about students who are studying history in different states? So it goes back to 3D printing and 3D scanning. How do we bring these sites into the classrooms across the nation? And so I actually included some of the 3D renderings from the Virtual Creation Laboratory's collection, including some of the artifacts from Montpelier. And you'll see that this just gives another visual presentation of how these artifacts look. They're easily 3D printed. For objects this size, it would take less than an hour to print something. You could print both of these objects in less than an hour. So another unique thing about Montpelier is their iron conservation is done in-house. So they don't have to go ahead and send it off to another place. It's all done there. So that's just something to add to it. I wanted to make sure I discussed how thankful I am for the opportunity that my undergraduate professor, Dr. Means, presented to me because, a lot of students have went through working as interns in this program and it's just jumpstart their careers, including myself. So I think 3D printing can take you a lot of places, and whether you're using it in academic outreach or you're taking it into engineering side of things, it's just something that, it's very helpful for historians, enthusiasts, and everyone in between. Here's some more images from some of the things I have 3D scanned. As you'll see, this is a 3D scanner that's not like a handheld or attached to a phone. This is a stationary 3D scanner, very detailed compared to the ones that are attached to phones. And some of the objects that I have been able to 3D print have been able to be used for museum purposes. So on the left, we have an image of several bones from a Betherian bombardier, which is, if you see what it looks like, it looks very similar to a woolly mammoth, but we spent hours on 3D printing these artifacts to recreate the original animals. And so just being able to take those, 3D prints and have something on display of a replica is just another way that I've been able to use history to, tell the stories. And some of the schools and workshops that I went to, the students have been able to see these objects and hold them in their hand. And once again, bringing history to reality. I think another thing that people may not have thought about with the 3D scanning and printing is that it's also really beneficial to students of visual, the visually impaired community. Like that's something that is very important when, creating curriculum for students, is being able to create it where it's accessible and available for all students. And you'll see in the image on the right, it's actually the signature of President George Washington, but it's been embossed in a way where you can feel the signature and not just, it would be something where someone could feel it, not only just see it. Or adding Braille to artifacts is another thing that helps to bring history to life. And I have a few more artifacts here that are in the collection through the Virtual Creation Laboratory that are on display on sketchfab.com. And just some of the resources that people can take advantage of for the particular collection that the Virtual Creation Laboratory has. But we see more and more archaeology labs are moving in that direction of having artifacts readily available to download if you do have a 3D printer personally, or you're going to your local library and downloading these artifacts to incorporate into teaching at home with your kids, or educators being able to incorporate it into their curriculum. And that's my short presentation. I hope that you have more questions, and
That was really great. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I think artifacts have a new life and a new way for interpretation, and you can bring it back to the site. Archaeologists often, when they remove the artifacts, they're out of situ forever. And to think that you could replicate a display in one of the enslaved cabins of what was found there, that's mind blowing, because you probably would want to keep it in a conservation area because of some things may be fragile or they may not be good to be out in the elements. It's amazing to think what we're just at the tip of the iceberg. Where do you think 3D printing is going as far as like further advancements or larger scale things? I mean, obviously I saw I didn't quite remember the name, but like a woolly mammoth.
Bomber from, and it's quite a mouthful. I'll type it out for you because I may be pronouncing it wrong, but I practice a lot. I remember practicing all the time when I was an intern to make sure I said it right. So I think I got it right. But yes, and that was large scale. That was very large. Each one of those bones took maybe 6 to 7 hours. So we were printing it to scale, and that thankfully working in an academic institution, like they had, and receiving grants and everything helps to fund those kind of projects because it can, add up, but it's very rewarding.
That's pretty amazing. I think Terri would probably remember when I was flying from Chicago to Denver one time, I handed over to her something I had bought. There was a mineral show. And of course, there's always people that are finding pieces of fossils and whatnot. This is part of a femur to a mammoth.
That's so great.
And that's, because all the cross sections and everything. I was like, wow, to think the 3D print that I could give it as a gift to all my family members now. And my family members probably think I get rocks in my head, literally. I mean, for me, I've always been interested in the past, especially even the past that doesn't genealogically connect to me. But that's fascinating. Terri, what are your thoughts on the whole thing?
Amazing. But what really struck for me was the embossed signature of George Washington.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about my own ancestors' signatures that you have, right? Because I always clip them because I just think it's amazing to be able to, like, oh my God, this was in their hand. But to give it to a blind person who can't see it, and now they can feel it, and that's just amazing.
I know it really is. I love that David pulled out the femur, and I'm going to take a little spooky. I'm bringing out a tombstone that I 3D printed. Let's see if we can get it. Okay.
I can kind of see it. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That is great. I love it. That's awesome. That is, well, being a former Civil War reenactor with the 12th Massachusetts, I must say that I think every reenactor needs a mini tombstone for the person they historically represent, just to kind of stay grounded.
No, it's really fascinating, the whole 3D printing, especially. And then if you, like, another thing, like I do, like, before I got into archaeology, I went to high school for visual arts. So like I do drawing, and that's another cool thing that you could do is like draw, if someone has that artistic ability, drawing out what you think the soldier looked like, or if you have a reference image and you can create that into the 3D, you can 3D enhance that to be able to be printed, because we have scanned people and 3D printed them. So if you have an image of a person, you can go into these 3D modeling programs, model it up, and then you have a miniature, soldier. So has a soldier, has a tombstone. Might spook some people out, but it's kind of cool.
That's really, really cool. Well, you will not freak me out over having a gravestone at home, because I've written books on cemeteries for over 20 years, and it's like, I think that's kind of neat. I kind of think if I get a 3D printer, I'm probably going to have to start replicating ancestral gravestones and just have a little, cemetery lined up.
No, I mean, but I remember in our conversation, you were talking about a tombstone that had been destroyed. If you wouldn't mind sharing that, because that's what really inspired my discussion today with including the tombstone in 3D printing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've wandered enough cemeteries over the years. I mean, a lot of times those slate gravestones in the 18th century will break apart, and there's one stone that I came, and it was just basically in fragments, and it was doing just light cleaning around it. I was able to find the stone of my ancestor that was in about 9, 10 pieces. And I took a photograph of it. But think of taking that technology and then being able to clean it up and stitch it. You technically could replicate what the stone would have looked like. I'm sure that archaeologists are using that, because how many times you find a piece of a plate and you don't have maybe 3/4 of the rest of it, but you envision what it looked like. So gravestones can be done the same way.
Absolutely. And the technology, like when I was an intern, that was like a lot of times we were stitching together through multiple 3D scans to recreate the object, just like you see with plates that are found or any kind of ceramics that are found. So I think that's what, especially with cemeteries that are neglected, I know that was some takeaway I had last week when I was doing a presentation. A lot of people contacted me about the cemeteries. Like, this is a big issue we're seeing throughout the United States. It's just the neglect or grave robbing, or not like humans, but like of stealing tombstones or destroying them. And if we have more people 3D having these virtual cemeteries, just per se, where you have proof, you have a copy of the tombstone, it just makes it a lot easier, because I think a lot of these family cemeteries, they have tombstones that are created, you'll see handwritten, like with a stick, someone made it. Like, how do you want to keep that kind of history? So like, I think the 3D scanning really helps to preserve history in a way that we haven't looked at in the past.
It really does. I mean, marble gravestones itself, because of the sugaring that the stone is falling apart of, because marble inside is beautiful. Marble outside, you add the elements, I don't care what part of the world you're from, it usually will break down. And the lower epitaphs on the stone, may it be biblical or just some, personal saying that they have on there, those are the lighter inscriptions are disappearing. And it's going to probably only be another generation or two before some of those inscriptions are going to completely be gone. So if you capture it now, you're preserving the worthwhile past for the future. So that's a brilliant idea, Michelle.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I see people, like, I was reading more literature on it, and I see more people, doing that, just that 3D scanning these, just like the image I found online. People are going into the cemeteries, uploading it to like websites like Find a Grave, Billion Graves, and not only already uploading the image of the tombstone, but uploading these 3D files that can be saved into, JPEGs or PNG files.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, I'll tell you, I just never would have thought that I would be bringing a gravestone home, but it's just that think of the stocking stuffer. Yeah,
That was right up my alley. So like, I just hope people share the same interest.
I think they do. If they're tuning into this show, they probably are.
Indeed.
So what
Yeah.
do you plan for the rest of the year? Do you get any special projects or anything you're looking forward to doing now that things are getting back to normal a little bit?
Yeah, so I have a few projects in the works. Some I can't go into much detail about, but they're all related to preserving USCT history. And one of my personal projects I'm working on, because I have a lot of family from Henderson, Kentucky, I've been going through some of the records on Ancestry. They have the requests for headstone requests for USCT soldiers on Ancestry is in a collection. It's from the 1860s to 1904. So I went through the collection and identified all of the soldiers from Henderson, or at least those who died in Henderson. And I'm just going ahead and trying to see if I can map them out, because I have GIS background. So just mapping those out, because I've went to so many family cemeteries every year. I would visit Henderson since graduating. And so that's something I'm really passionate about, making sure that any of those tombstones that we aren't able to find, requesting them to be reshipped out and having them replaced, because it's just a part of history that unfortunately a lot of descendants, they only learn about it once they start researching their family. So I think just that's something I'm working on and really excited about.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that the start of the Civil War is 160 years ago, but there was sometimes there's many generations between the soldier and now. I mean, my grandmother's uncle was a drummer boy in the Civil War, and I know of him because she knew him. But there are other ones that until they find it online or they find it through their research, I have a Civil War ancestor. I mean,
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I think anybody who's trying to keep the memory of a soldier, especially USCT, alive, I tip my hat to you there. That's an important project to do, and a large project to do for that matter. So that's more than just what you're doing this summer, obviously.
Yes, and that's why I'm starting pretty small scale, because the town that my family is from in Henderson, it's not, the county itself is not that big, and the amount of soldiers, I think it's a good size. And I just think when you're looking at small towns or small counties, everyone connects together one way or another. So I think all of us agree with genealogy. When you're starting your research, you have to know the county you're working in. You can't just focus on the family. You have to look at the county, the adjacent counties, maybe even the adjacent states, because that county is right on the, like 10 miles from Evansville, Indiana. So it's widespreading when you really look at it.
That's excellent. Well, listen, I hope that we run into you again and hear about more of your adventures in the fascinating world of genealogy, anthropology, archaeology, 3D printing gravestones, and other things. You're a delight to have on. And Terri, do you have any final questions for Michelle?
No, I don't. I think you covered them quite well. It's
Yeah.
been very interesting.
Thank you. Well, it's such an honor to be here today. So I'm glad we met on Clubhouse. Thank you again.
Well, Michelle, it's really great to have you on here. And I just want to tell our listeners, if you want to find out more about what Michelle does, or if you're interested in genealogy work that she's doing, you can visit her webpage, michellethegenealogist.com. And well, that's all I have for this week. And again, thank you, Michelle. It's always a pleasure as well to have Terri as my co-host on Virtual Historians. Well, until next time, virtually yours, signing off. Thanks for tuning in.
For those of you watching on YouTube, remember you can also find us on the audio podcast of your choice. Currently, we can be found on Anchor, Breaker, Castbox, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. And for those of you listening on audio, remember you can always find the full video recording on our YouTube channel. And if you like this episode, please feel free to leave a comment on the website or on YouTube. As always, you can find us at virtualhistorians.com. You can email us at info@virtualhistorians.com. And we ask that you please like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you.